Hello, everyone. I'm Nikunj again, and welcome you all to another episode of True ML, where we have a true ML leader, working with us for this episode today. Um, I'm just going to introduce Tushar, and Tushar has such varied experience that it's going to take a long time to actually cover things that Tushar has done in his career, and still only probably be able to cover, maybe a very small percentage of it. So Tushar has more than 20 years of industry experience, and he has worked across Silicon Valley and Wall Street at AWS, VMware, Facebook, Intel, Sun Microsystems, Oracle, Bank of America, and GE Capital. He has also worked in diverse fields spanning across product management, business development, mergers and acquisitions, software development, investment banking, etc. And here he has actually focused a lot on different technologies as well, starting from AI to cloud computing to virtualization to security and databases. So a lot of ground to cover there. And from a background perspective, Tushar has a BS in electrical engineering from one of the IITs back in India, and he did his master's in computer science in the US and also an MBA, where he was designated a Stern Scholar and also a member of the Beta Gamma Sigma organization as well. He has various publications in AI, high performance algorithms, bankruptcy, and reorganization as well. He has been a national level debater in macroeconomics, organized concerts of international artists, and is an active member of various IIT alumni organizations. That's kind of where I got to know Tushar as well. He himself is a co-founder of the worldwide IIT Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning Forum. He actually runs a very active Slack community for that as well, and he has spoken as guest speaker in many competitive events at MIT, IIT Delhi, and IIT Kanpur as well. So Tushar comes in with such a breadth and depth of experience that I'm super excited to about this episode and learn a lot from Tushar's experience, and I'm sure it's going to be very interesting to the listeners as well.
It's a
Um,
pleasure, and I'm pretty humbled with the introduction you have given. I have nothing more to add, and I'm happy to share whatever I can for the benefit of the community.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tushar, and really welcome you to the episode today. I would love to get started, Tushar, to learn a bit more about your experience of co-founding the IIT Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning Forum.
When we started the forum almost 7 to 8 years back, we had a vision, and the vision was each IITian in himself or herself may not be, having all the knowledge, but as a community, we can beat and surpass any other engineering institute in the world. So after 2015 Pan ID Global Leadership Conference in Bay Area and 2016 when I was involved with TICON, we came up with this idea of creating a free forum, a Slack-based forum for IITians worldwide to come together, share their knowledge, perspective, and information as well as help each other build companies, hire people. When we started it, a lot of people were very skeptical. They thought this is SIG, special interest group. It will just close down in a couple of months. Well, it has been 7 to 8 years, and we have grown. We got to 200 people within 2 weeks, actually,
Oh
and then
wow!
we are now 1,800 people across the world. It is absolutely run free. We have done events, we have supported other organizations, and it has grown into an inbuilt organization itself. I'm really happy. And this all is been successful because of contribution of IITians like yourself, who basically are free to, wish to share their information, help each other over a period of time, and that gives us a lot of strength. And most important, when we have our events and get together, they don't feel like a button down professional events. They almost become like cafeteria events, and every campus has one of those places where people used to sit down and joke around. IIT Kharagpur is one. I'm forgetting the name. So it gives you that kind of a feel with a personal connection with deep professional touch.
For sure. Awesome. This is like such a powerful vision, and I completely resonate with the fact that, a bunch of smart people coming together with some shared connection, some shared goal can do wonders. And in this case, folks from IIT working in artificial intelligence clearly seems Tushar, one other thing, you've been running this for the last 8 years or so, right? What are some of the most interesting events or achievements as a group that that you have seen that you found was were added a lot of value in some way for your own learning or to the community?
Couple of two or three things really stand out. Number one, In 2018, we managed and organized the complete one-day track for artificial intelligence at TiCon, which is a
Hmm.
very big conference here in Silicon Valley. We repeated the feat in 2019 and 2023. And some of the key leaders like Ashish Bansal and others were part of the track committee throughout. Um, Second thing which we have always recognized and noticed is when we used to have in-person events, and we are going to be doing more in-person events going forward, it built a amazing bond and lifelong connection among people who came together. We met, and then people have been hired from there, people have been funded from there, and some of this we are no cost events like a coffee chat in Menlo in Mountain View. And third was at the height of COVID, when everything was shut down for a couple of years, we were
Hmm.
still meeting every other week. And it became a source of knowledge, a source of power for us to keep the community coming together and going together throughout. So, number one, organizing some massive conferences. Number two, building an amazingly strong and close bond. And number three, being a support system in times when the whole world seemed to be shut down. We IITians were still engaged mentally. And if you're mentally engaged, that sense of community and support helps a lot over a period of time.
Wow, so powerful and so beautiful. Like it's really inspiring to hear this. Very nice. Tushar, the other thing is, like, besides running this community for so many years, you have also worked at some of the biggest tech giants as well, right? AWS, VMware, Intel, etc. Can you, and you have literally seen the AI industry as a whole grow over the last few decades. Any, like, pivotal moments that you would like to share, like, or any projects that might have shaped your own journey in the world of AI or ML that you want to share with everyone?
Right, couple of things here. So two or three things. Number one, the advent of cloud computing democratized AI. AI has existed since late 1950s. The algorithms and stuff we had already developed. I published papers in AI in late 1990s. What
Wow.
cloud computing did was it made compute and storage cheap and accessible enough for everybody to start working on it. Previously, a startup could not think about doing AI related stuff because you have to buy servers, do a lot of capex. Now you can go to cloud easily and work through that. So advent of cloud computing democratized artificial intelligence. It was a big change. Number two thing which I really found very intriguing and very working through it is some of the key advances which happened both in NLP, natural language processing, and computer vision. Computer vision was more of a solved problem, but natural language processing. The paper which was published from Google in 2017, Attention is All You Need, was Funny's paper, which is decoder encoder mechanism, right? And then over a period of time, OpenAI published GPT 1, 2, and 3 paper. People are talking about Chat GPT right now. I remember reading the papers in fall of 2020, and that gave you a new concept of pre-training the model and fine-tuning it. Now Chat GPT democratized it suddenly and made the whole thing very very popular in the world. But that was another pivotal movement. So advent of cloud computing, advent of transformers, and then this GPT and this whole concept of pre-training a model and then fine-tuning it. And it's something which I'm finding is going to be not just useful for natural language processing and computer vision, but also combination of the two, the multi-model approach or
Right.
looking at the multi-model problem.
That makes a ton of sense. And you actually touch on a very important topic here, like, that I actually wanted to dive deeper into the conversation today, which is around transformers and generative AI and Chat GPT and the general GPT series of models, right? Now, one interesting things that we are seeing as a trend is a lot of different industry verticals are basically trying to go after solving certain use cases that are specific to their own industry, right? Like using the GPTs of the world. And you actually have a very diverse background across different verticals. You've worked into multiple different verticals, right? Investment banking, private equity. You've worked in product management and software development and venture capital. So, like, you have a very diverse experience. Are you seeing, like, any specific type of problems or any specific industries that you expect to be almost the forerunners in being able to benefit from, like, as in from the applications of chat gpt and
See,
all the
in generative AI or AI in general, what we are finding right now is across all verticals, customer service and experience is one of the places which is considered to be a low-hanging fruit.
right.
And that is very interesting where AI and generative AI can be very easily applied. So it's one place where huge amount of data was already present,
Hmm.
run books, log books and stuff. Figuring out how to decrease the amount of time it takes to respond to customers
Hmm.
is a low hanging fruit across all industries.
Sure.
And that is what custom companies are focused upon, and they're working. And that's where most of the startups are getting funded right now.
Right. So Tushar, actually, like this customer support and also like some sort of Q&A over internal data sets. These are the two problems that I hear very frequently, but also very generically across different industries, right? So these are like not an industry specific problem in some way. Are there any industries that you're seeing where like this is a problem that only exists in this industry and they are going like really strong after it? Any such observations that you've had in?
Absolutely. So, look, when it comes to, I'll pick up a few industries like banking and finance, right? So they're always worried about risk assessment and fraud detection and risk management. It's a very big area for financial services because losing certain amount of money can be big detrimental to your bottom line and top line. That's one area where financial services companies have or will be spending money going forward. When it comes to retail, for example, personalization is a big deal, and anything you can do to personalize your offerings, your communications with customers will go a great way.
Hmm.
That is retail. In case of insurance, it comes to figuring out premium determination and again risk assessment. That is part of the game that is being played out there. So these are some of the so retail in sentiment analysis, personalization in banking, finance, insurance, fraud detection, risk assessment. These are really helpful. In healthcare, typically it takes much more time for technology adoption to happen, but in healthcare, when it comes to patient advocacy and how you basically work your way through that, in figuring out how to diagnose disease much faster and much quicker without going through the whole surgical processes, and doing it remotely, for example, can revolutionize healthcare, not just from profit perspective, but also from the perspective of you know taking medical science to those people in remote areas of the world where doctors may not be available or nurses may not be available. There are two or three areas where I see this kind of things happening at a much faster pace. Hopefully generative AI kind of accelerates the pace and adoption of these technologies in addressing these challenges.
Got it. I see. This is very interesting. I think you have given like three interesting insights towards different industries. If I may, I would love to zoom a little bit into like the risk assessment bit of it, right? So how do you foresee LLMs or generative AI in general, um, like kind of solving some of the risk assessment type of problems? Like what are some of the problems that these financial institutions have been trying to solve, and how do LLMs help in this journey?
Let me give you a little bit more deeper insight into it and answer a very fundamental question: what is risk assessment, right? The way risk assessment was typically done initially a long time back, you're meeting somebody, filling up a form, right? And then you start giving computerized form. Then the scores came in. You get this FICO scores and this scores from different credit rating agencies, right? What are they trying to do? They're trying to look at certain attributes of a particular person who is looking for something, whether a loan or a mortgage or whatever, and determining how much risk or risky they are, right? But the good news is, you know, a person cannot be and should not be determined by just a few factors. We need to look into multiple different factors to come up with an assessment. The challenge was risk assessment was kind of little bit more limited because companies did not have that data. Availability of data, which basically, for example, your spending pattern, your buying pattern, your behavior online with different kind of agencies, or your track record of billing, track record of payment, what stage of your life you are. All of these things will be taken into consideration when a risk assessment is done. For example, I'll give you a very interesting example. When I've joined my first job in Intel near Seattle and then Portland, I was coming out of college. I had $10,000 in my bank account, which was more than most of the students have, because I'd done a good internship and had a good job. It's 1999. I was probably making fifty to $60,000 annual salary with some more RSUs and bonuses. Now, when I joined Intel, and then there was Microsoft in Seattle, right? If you go in to purchase a car, and they will do a risk assessment. If you're coming from Intel or Microsoft, you had a much better chance of getting a car loan and buying a car than you're coming from some other company. Now, irrespective of your credit scores, because that's what they looked into it. The the car dealerships and stuff like that. So now what they were doing was they were looking at my own risk profile, my assets, but also on the companies which have hired me and their risk profile. Think about this. So if you look into these, combining these kind of what are called associative factors in risk determination, the risk profile changes completely. Versus, let's say somebody is joining a company which nobody knows that can go down under in 6 months. You want a car loan for 3 years, the game changes. Until Microsoft, we're not expected to go down in 3 years in 1999, that the year after 30 years also. So these kind of factors, which are typically not catered or factored into the traditional risk assessment, can be not taken into consideration to make a better judgment about a person and go from there.
Got it. And you expect that LLMs would become much better at being able to process such information.
I mean, if you look carefully, right, large language models are not a fundamental innovation like electricity, as some people say. These are basically much more powerful engines to do the same thing, which were being done previously at a much slower speed, with much slower hardware. So what it does is, previously, if certain amount of information would have taken 20 days or 10 days to process, it can be done in an hour or two. And that can make the applicability and use of these models much faster, much better. So that's the way you have to look at it.
Hmm.
So they have accelerated the pace of adoption of technology. It's like thinking like this, right? If a village is connected to a nearby city and there's no paved road, then you take a bullock cart or go on a bicycle or whatever, right? And it takes you 5 hours to reach there or 4 hours. You put a paved road, now you can basically get on a bike or a car or a bus and reach there in 30 minutes or 15 minutes or something like that, right? That paved road is LLM. It's not changing where you're going to, where you from where you're going to, from, and your to destination is not changing. The speed at which you get there is changing, but then that changes the game completely, right?
For sure.
So so it's, I mean, coming from a country which is still considered to be a developing country, we have seen within in our own country in India how much economic progress you make is based a lot on the infrastructure which exists.
No,
LLM provides that infrastructure for faster acceleration of economic growth. That's how you have to look at it.
very interesting. That's a very interesting perspective about looking at LLMs. And I can at least imagine a way where, for example, something as simple as, like, just making the developers more productive in what they are doing itself is like that highway that you're talking about, or that road that you're talking about.
Exactly, right?
So whether itself it's solving this whatever the risk assessment classification problem or not, it's probably making it easier for others to be able to solve that problem. Very
I'll give you a
nice.
very specific example. It's important in developer productivity or in general engineering productivity, right?
Right.
When I used to work in Intel and when we used to get a ticket was filed, we used to call it citing, and there was one word term which I was forgetting it now. So you basically file a kind of an internal ticket to look for something. Microprocessors being manufactured, you are testing it in different labs. Now, if I had to basically a bug used to come, then I had to manually go and look for bugs which were of similar nature,
Hmm.
do some search, figure it out. I used to prepare files on every bug. My team leader was very impressed. Oh, this guy's looking, and then figure out how to solve it. Right? All
Right.
of that can be easily automated if you have LLM models which can query and look at the bug that has been filed, look for keyword search or whatever they do, and come up with a bunch of recommendations. Right? So the
Right.
productivity of me as an engineer would have gone much higher in terms
Right.
of suggesting what kind of changes which can be made. They may look simple things, but they really add up very quickly. And that way, people can focus more on what they need to do to solve the problem rather than figuring out the parameters of the problem, what they are similar to, and then going from there.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I completely understand where you're coming from.
The only thing which LLMs cannot, have not been able to do, and probably they will not be able to do, is to crack the JE paper. You cannot do it. It's one piece of human it's one piece of human brain, and the way it was basically designed
Yeah.
was to beat the system, because I remember the syllabus for JE was less than any other exams I used to appear for. In our times you had to appear for multiple exams. Every institution had their own exam and stuff like that.
Right.
But the questions were more tricky because it made you think and not do a rote learning.
Right, for sure. Yes, absolutely. I was playing around with Llama 2 yesterday, and it actually, like, very simple reasoning. It actually, you could throw it off with. So I made a very simple prompt saying, imagine the diameter of a circle is two times its radius. Okay, which is like a matter of fact. Now, what will be the circumference of the circle if the radius is r? So ideally, like there's nothing that I'm no interesting question, and it's like, oh,
He
if
could
this
not come up with 2 pi r.
2 pi times 2r, so it's gonna be 4 pi r. I'm like, um, reasoning is something that LLMs have not become very good at, and clearly JE requires a lot of reasoning. So I understand where you're coming from. Yeah. Very interesting. So, Tushar, one other thing that I want to talk about, talking like thinking in terms of industries and verticals and impact of LLMs. Now, this field is evolving really fast, and the way this is evolving is this almost like I see three different types of players that are kind of advancing the field. One is like you have these the foundation model builders, right? The OpenAI's, Google's, and Metas of the world, right? The other is like these platforms that kind of support building things on top of the foundation models. So imagine your AWS SageMaker, like AWS launching like Jumpstart, or um, similarly Google launching like stuff on Vertex AI. So a lot of these hyperscalers are launching out their own platforms to play around with, and then there's the entire startup ecosystem that's coming after the problems from different angles, like monitoring of LLMs, deployments of LLMs, industry specific LLMs. So there's a lot of these different. How do you foresee this field evolving? And at least if you have to take a guess about some steady state 3 5 years down the line, where do you see different pieces getting solved by which type of players in the ecosystem?
See, you have already answered your question. Go back and let me quickly check something here. So your undergraduate degree was in electrical and electronics engineering. So probably you had one course in power systems, I'm assuming, somewhere, right? Look at the traditional utility model. How does it work? You have power generation companies who generate power, who own big power plants, right? Hydroelectric power plants, coal fired power plants, nuclear power plants. Then there are companies who have transmission lines from these power plants to cities. And
Right.
then you have distributors who basically distribute electricity across the whole city. All of three can be owned by the same entity, typically not. It's a segmented industry.
Hmm.
You look at it in the same way. There will be power plant generators, the foundation model developers, right? Cloud computing is like power generation, where it's now power generation is not done in every home, but computing storage is owned by certain entities. There'll be
Hmm.
transmission lines. These are the companies who are developing this LLM ops, you know, developing model fine tuning capabilities, other things, which makes it much easier to use these LLMs, right? And
Right.
then there'll be distributors, startup companies or other niche products who basically help you figure out how to leverage this for specific applications, and that way you can pick it up and work. And based upon how big you are, you'll figure out how to play. If you only thing you need is specific applications, you'll just work with this distributors, right? Like if I'm living in my home, the only thing I care about is PG&E, right? But
Right.
if you are somebody who wants to develop these apps themselves, then you want to work with the transmission providers, right? And you'll build this as SaaS apps or whatever apps yourself, right?
Hmm.
And a few cases you might like to own the foundation model. It's the same generation, transmission, distribution model that we had for electrical power generation that gets repeated again and again over a period of time.
That's such an interesting analogy.
I'm an
um
electrical engineer by training. My undergrad was electrical, my master's was computer science, and my
right.
dad is an electrical engineer also. So many times and he lives with me. So many times I'm trying to explain to him concepts related to artificial intelligence and machine learning. I use analogies from electrical engineering, control systems to help him get it. And it
Right.
actually resonates and it makes sense.
Very nice, very nice. I think there is some inherent advantage that people coming from interdisciplinary backgrounds have, like it's always a thing. Tushar, like I want to go a little bit deeper into this, because talking about this analogy itself, there's a couple of different schools of thoughts that are coming in, right? So for example, we talk about these the power producers, right, in some way, right, the power generators in some way, the LLMs. Now, with LLMs, like one thing that some, there's a school of thought that predicts that the super generic LLMs are going to become good enough at almost all the tasks. And because of the simplicity to use LLMs, like you literally invoke an API and like the same LLM can be used for like 100 different tasks, a lot of the middleware will not be needed as the ecosystem evolves. Some folks believe that, right? Some other folks believe that it's unlikely or it's unmanageable to have these giant mega LLM solve all the 100 problems that they're currently solving, and that's not sustainable. And there will be a very mature middleware system that will evolve in some way, right? Any thoughts on that? And obviously, I'm also touching on the fact that, like, this kind of also talks about, like, how do you see, like, the closed source versus open source LLMs evolving. So I think we will also would love to also hear your thoughts on that as well.
See, this is again not a GenAI specific problem, but something which has existed whenever a new technology comes in, right? Between open source and closed source, typically the way it actually ultimately works out is, uh, you have a few closed source big players, and then you have a bunch of open source players. You can
Hmm.
work with open source typically to do dev testing, but if you want to productionize something at a massive scale, you go with something which is closed source because you need somebody to support it.
Hmm.
Now, whether you develop it from scratch or you take an open source and basically make it more proprietary, and you start like Red Hat Linux kind of model, or you have Sun Microsystems Unix Solaris model. That's a debatable question. Unix, if I remember correctly, was developed in AT&T Bell Labs, right? And then over a period of time, people developed different versions of it. You had Berkeley Unix, and you had Solaris, you had Red Hat Linux, a lot of different things, right? So there'll be a space for both, but for large scale productionization of products, you got to have something which is backed, something which is where you can make a phone call to get a support. You can't just launch a product where you're diagnosing the problem and you tell your customer, "Now I've reached the open source part of it. I have no clue how it works." Right?
True.
That is closed source versus open source. Now comes the middleware part of it. It's going to be somewhere between where it's like public cloud versus private cloud. Both of them have space for itself, right? Yes, some of these models will become very generic. It will take care of a lot of different things. But think about big companies, enterprises in financial services, healthcare, manufacturing, retail. They would not like to share their data with these companies. There are a lot of things that are proprietary to both the industries and the companies, and they would like to fine tune because that's where their proprietary information, intellectual property resides, and they want
Right.
to basically use it from that particular perspective and work from there. So it will be a combination of the two. How far it will go? Maybe some of the big players will have a generic version and an industry specific version both. If I remember correctly, Amazon Web Services has products which are some of them are data lakes which are specific to medical sciences. Some of them are more generic in nature. So it's going to be a combination of the two. But if you look at from the customer perspective, there are big enterprises, there are medium enterprises, small companies. The small companies will who just want to use something will use the big, the generic versions, right? The really large enterprises will probably develop their own versions of it, right? And the SMB sectors, the medium companies, when they're starting, they'll probably go a generic version, but then develop something which is specific to their own needs. And that's where their proprietary, that's where their unique value proposition will come in. And then you basically build a model around business around it.
Here, like, when you talk about um people being able to pull off, like, their in terms of, like, almost the building out their entire stack themselves, like, and kind of fine tuning their models themselves, like, these large companies. Do you mean to say more like on prem, or do you mean like not invoking commercial LMs like OpenAI but still leveraging the cloud providers like AWS or whatever on cloud?
So I will have to myself understand this a little bit better. The field is still evolving. I would assume that they would need to get some version of the model which is under their confine, which they are basically, which they are fine tuning for their purposes going forward, right?
Hmm.
If you're always going back to the the cloud-based APIs, then how are you going to fine tune something, right? So that's the way I will look at it. Or maybe what they will do is they'll develop some models which invoke certain APIs from the public cloud, but then feed it to some kind of a model which is internal, whether it they store it on their private cloud or public cloud doesn't matter, but
Hmm.
something which is within the confines of the company to leverage. I mean, think about this: if everybody is going to access the same data which is generic, then you cannot build proprietary products. It's like this, right? Think it like this, make it simple. Plastic is a commodity,
Hmm.
right? I'm assuming your family also has some business, if probably
Yes.
has in some
Yes.
kind of businesses they are in Calcutta. And but different companies make different products out of it.
Hmm.
Some make a plastic cup, some make a plastic bathtub, some make a plastic seat, right? So they all take this generic source of plastic, but they basically mold it to their needs to build a business.
Hmm.
If that unique thing does not come in, then you do not have a business. A business occurs when you take certain kind of raw materials, labor, and your intellectual power to create something new. Look at LLMs now as, especially foundational models, as raw materials. You'll have to take that, you have to understand the customer problem and build something which is unique to the customer needs, and then work from there. The good news is, if plastic is a common commodity, then it can be produced at a bulk scale and its price will come down. So economies of scale will kick in. So the plastic providers, people are building products or plastic products do not have to worry about it. They'll have to work from that particular angle. That kind of game will get played here. So now you do not have to worry about training a big large model. You'll start with something basic. The cost will
Mm.
help you come down because everybody's using the model, and then you will put your effort into actually solving customer specific challenges to build products. Think like that.
Mm. I see.
And by the way, Nikunj, I always tell people, civilization evolves, new technologies come in. That does not fundamentally change how human brain, how economics works, right? Adam Smith wrote that particular book, right? Wealth of Nations in 1776. And I'm an economist by training as well. So the book is still valid, right? Or Marx's philosophies are still valid when it comes to, how labor supply works or government works. So these fundamental things remain. What you're seeing is an evolution of it with different players and components coming into it.
Very interesting. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's amazing to see like how like you are kind of like boiling down all the like new growing technologies into like the fundamentals of how things work, and like always like able to mind map things in that way. It's very nice to see
I
that
mean,
kind
think about Nikunj. I'm not sure whether you have kids or not, but people always say, "Oh, this is a new generation. This is America. This is this. This is that." But what I'm finding is the certain value systems which our parents brought us up. Let's say in eastern part of India, in some remote city, the fundamental value system does not change.
of
The
right.
fundamental aspect does not change. On this Saturday evening, I took my son to Art of Living Satsang class, 13 and a half years old kid. I
Hmm.
want to instill in his brain that after a tough and a long week, the solution is not partying and drinking. The solution is, doing some worship and being with right kind of people. My father instilled that in me in a different way at a different time.
Huh.
You know, those good habits helped my dad. It helped me. It helped my son. I God knows how much he is going to accept it. The fundamental things in life do not change.
Nice. No, that makes a ton of sense.
And think it like this. Yes, you have much better ways of taking care of kids now, with a lot of paraphernalia in place and nannies and this. But that human emotion of a father or a mother, when the happiness they feel looking at the son,
Right.
that does not change
Not change.
500 years back or 500 years later, right?
Right.
And there can be no medicine which can be better than a crying 1 year old kid getting into a mom's lap.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing has been able to replace it, right? So
That's
that
true.
fundamental thing, you can't build a machine around it. I'm just giving you a philosophical aspect. Same thing happens, right? When I talk about artificial intelligence, the reason I like this field is it's a way to mimic how human brain works.
Right.
And human brain has worked in a certain way over a period of time, and so AI will also evolve the way human brain way of working has evolved. What you're giving people is a more powerful tool to do something, right?
Right. 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 That makes a ton of sense. Yeah. Um, Awesome, Tushar. There are a couple of other things, especially like that today that I wanted to chat with you about. Especially, I think that like you have been in product management for a really long time, and I would love for you to put your product management hat on for like maybe like the next couple of discussions that I wanted to bring up,
Sure.
and we're gonna just brainstorm together. So for example, there are a bunch of startups that are trying to solve a lot of interesting problems in generative AI, right? So imagine that there is one startup that's kind of helping solve what they call as a RAG use case, right? Retrieval augmented generation, where they have some internal data sources and they want to like just query the data source so that like now the knowledge base is available to everyone, right? Now if you were working with a startup or like you're already working with AWS, like do you feel like building out tooling to help people build like generic RAG systems, does it fall more in the domain of an AWS, or does it fall more in the domain of a startup? Or how would you basically as a product manager think from being in AWS versus being at a startup? Like, what would be your thought process here?
Right. So when you are working for a big company, whether it's
Yeah.
AWS or Dell or VMware, you typically build platforms or things which can be very easily applied across multiple different verticals. Your
Right.
Salesforce, things like this, and that's how you can scale up your business. You'll try to basically develop some fundamental technologies which enable retrieval augmented generation, right? That's how you'll think. When you're in a startup, we're in a survival mode. You're not looking to developing a generic technology which people come and buy. You
Hmm.
basically have to figure out a few key verticals and a few focused sub segment of that vertical where you can get some initial customers to get the traction. And you'll
Hmm.
be focused upon leveraging a RAG to solve certain specific customer use cases right now. Now, if
Hmm.
you succeed in doing that, then you can slowly and slowly increase the number of use cases and verticals that you're working upon, and then over a period of time, build a more generic platform. That's how you have to think. A lot of people in startups, start thinking, "Oh, I will develop a." It's very attractive to think one day I'm going to turn on to be next Microsoft. It does not work that way. And there's something which I learned. I still exactly remember on 5th March 2015 when I was launching the IIT BHU Bay Area chapter, alumni chapter at the time. And I had done an event which was called the Hidden Entrepreneur. And I got three very successful entrepreneurs and I moderated a panel. And one of them basically was still an entrepreneur, uh, gave us this very interesting insight. Start with some specific use cases, specific areas, try to solve that problem and take it to the next level. That's how you have to think.
Hmm. I see. So you were basically explaining how a startup can move really fast and still get gain that advantage over like some of the big companies like AWS and all in such a setting, right? Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Right, the two parts to it, right? So, look, as in startup, uh, if you move fast, get your product out, right? Andy Grove's book, Only the Paranoid Survive, says that if you're building a successful business, somebody will come and take part of it, and somebody else will come and take a part of it, and one day your business will be gone. So you have to keep evolving, okay? And you do that in a very fast pace, you do that. But you should also know that if you have real problem to solve and you've got some really good solution, then you can be an attractive M&A candidate.
Hmm.
So it's not like you have to be fighting a David versus Goliath battle all the time. You can be a very good M&A candidate, and if you have something which basically makes sense and which has come to a point, and I myself worked in investment banking and mergers and acquisitions, I'm very familiar with this.
Hmm.
That you can easily pick up something.
Got it. Understood. All right, very helpful. And just a couple of other topics that I would love to touch on today. So you have been working as a PM here, and like one of the battles or struggles that always exist in our field. I would love to hear about how you're circumventing this. Is kind of navigating through um, basically like almost setting out the roadmap of what's gonna happen. But there are kind of technical gaps, right? Like for example, the engineering counterparts would have some things that they understand about the solution that let's say the product or the leadership counterparts may not have enough insights on. The product and leadership counterparts may be seeing some trends in the industry that the engineering counterparts may not be able to relate very well, right? So there's always this a little bit of a divide here, right? How do you navigate these
So,
scenarios, and especially with a fast moving field like Gen AI, because something that was a problem yesterday is a solved thing today, right? So would love to understand how you strategize here.
so the way we look at it is the way I run this forum. We have a bunch of people who are very deep technologists, bunch of people who are very good, product leaders. And I think you should join our bi-weekly, generative AI weekend sessions, which we are holding nowadays. As a leader, you have to listen to the technical people to understand what their constraints are. Okay.
Hmm.
As a business leader or product person, you got to understand what the customer problem is. Okay. It always helps to be a PM if you have been an engineer in the past. So
Hmm.
you can empathize with engineers very much better. The people who
Hmm.
have done it without it, that's fine. I have deep respect for them as well. And then you have to come with a realistic plan, and that's where prioritization comes into picture. And you look at multiple different factors when you're trying to prioritize something to basically get it to a level where it can basically fit in. You look at the customer opportunity, you look at the complexity of implementation of the product, you look at your engineering resources, you look at the size of the market which you're trying to tackle and get it.
Right.
It's not a science, it's a combination of science and art. You get this multiple factors into consideration together, and then you come up with a plan to prioritize it, make a call, and take accountability. That's part of what I call a methodical way of doing it. Second, a lot of egos which come into play, personalities come into play. You've got to take everybody together, and everybody needs to be felt heard. Everybody needs to be felt included. When you do that, then that whole thing starts working. So, combination of your own understanding of the business, your ability to make prioritization call based upon multiple factors, and human relationships is what basically moves this forward.
That makes sense. No, I think that makes a ton of sense, Tushar. I wanna, like, I think specific to this field, I personally am struggling a little bit about, like, how to navigate some of these things. And I know from my conversations with the startup community that a lot of other entrepreneurs and even other business leaders in the space are struggling with this, given how fast this is evolving. So let's assume that you thought that, fine tuning is a problem that a lot of companies want to solve. You realize that fine tuning is a problem because it takes like many hours, many days, and a lot of infrastructure cost and understanding to be able to fine tune a model properly. Okay. And a couple of weeks later, people launch a new technology, low rank adaptation, where you are able to fine tune things much quicker, while able to retain the accuracy, but like you slash the uh, cost and time of fine tuning by like a factor of 100, right? So the entire problem that you thought that you want to invest in is a non-issue now, right? And similar developments happen extremely frequently in the space, right? So how do you kind of think about where you want to strategize longer term versus adapt to like this fast moving uh,
It's
changes?
a very interesting problem. I call it driving on a road while you're paving the road. You
Hmm.
pave few miles and you drive your car. You
Right.
cannot pave 100 miles and then drive your car. Okay.
Hmm.
So it's a very tricky problem. So what you have to do is you got to have a mindset and a team which is very nimble and agile. Okay.
Hmm.
So you should have an ability to, of course, look at problems, and that's where your leadership comes in, and your understanding of competitive landscape and industry comes in,
Hmm.
right? First of all, the question is if somebody else solved it so fast, so quickly, why we could not do that earlier, right? So what you do is you work with your team to come with some reasonable 3 or 4 problems, knowing that a few of them might fall off the plate. And
Right.
then you try to work on that and work through that. Now it's still possible that somebody will come and outbeat you. But typically, no market typically is so small, there's only space for one player. You can be a late, maybe the person has reached the market first and they will try to figure out how to navigate it, but they'll also face challenges which you have not thought about. Let them go and figure it out. You come after them, learn from their mistakes, build your product, which is better, and maybe you'll be the second. That's how Microsoft has done it throughout
Right.
all these decades. They're never the first person to bring a product to the market.
Right.
That's how you have to think. Like, and sometimes companies do the mistakes themselves. Google had all the components that were required for generative AI and
Right.
stuff from way before, right? Microsoft is much better at productization, and they're so kind with OpenAI, and they're giving, Google run for money. That's how you have to think. So just because somebody else succeeded earlier does not mean that you can't catch up. You can still
Makes
come along, come forward, and get through it.
makes a ton of sense. Makes a lot of sense here. And Tushar, one last question. This is a question for the leaders, data science and engineering leaders who are watching this video. Um, Anything that you would advise them in terms of building out their generative AI strategy, which is something that a lot of leaders are investing a lot of time on, right? And
Right.
you hear perspectives from so many people. You have your own perspectives. Would love to pass along your advice to them.
See, one of my business school's professors, Aswar Damodaran at Stern, told us just because you have a hammer in the hand, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
That's not the approach you should take. Instead of thinking about how to use generative AI to solve business problem, look at first your business challenges, understand what they are, work backwards from there to see which technologies fit in. And if generative AI is one of them, leverage it. Quite possible most of the companies who are jumping up and down right now do not really have problems that actually requires a powerful tool like generative AI. You typically do not need a tank when you can do with a gun. So work backwards from there. And a lot of these leaders also want to, make their resume shine and look good and stuff like that, which is fine. So that's the way you have to think. Don't think in terms of what can I do with generative AI. Think in can you do to increase your business, to increase your top line, what customer challenges, what business problems you have to solve. work backwards from there, and then see where you land up. That's the right approach towards what you want to go get to.
Yeah, it's amazing that you bring this up. Like I have talked to a bunch of companies where they have actually gotten top-down mandates that every single team in the company should come up with one or two generative AI use cases that they want to solve for. And I'm like,
It's like I got a hammer in the house. Everybody should figure out if there's a nail in the room. I
yeah,
mean, it doesn't go, and then there are turf wars. Everybody's trying to outsmart each other. The whole world looks like a Gen AI problem. I mean, no,
yeah.
that's not how you run a business.
That makes a ton of sense. Awesome. Thank you so much, Tushar. Really insightful conversations, very fundamental and like at philosophical levels as well. I enjoyed talking to you a lot, and I'm sure that our listeners would learn from it as well. So thank you so much for
Absolutely.
participating.